Hello and welcome back to another episode of Once Upon a Dribble. Today, continuing our 10-part series on conference finals MVPs. And for those tuning in for the first time, for a little bit of context on this series and the reason for it, obviously the conference finals MVP is an award in actuality, but didn't start getting handed out until a couple of years ago in the 2022 conference finals when Steph Curry and Jason Tatum won the first award. So, I thought it'd be fun to retroactively go back year by year, all the way back to the beginning of the conference finals and highlight some awesome performances, some awesome series, some awesome teams that deserve a little bit of recognition and see who might be deserving of some extra hardware in their trophy case. So again, this is part 5 of a 10-part series. We've done the 70s and the 80s so far in both the East and West. And today's episode, we are moving forward in time. We are now in the 1990s in the Eastern Conference for today. And the next time, we'll look at the Western Conference before moving into the 2000s. So, 1990s in the Eastern Conference, if you're even a casual basketball fan, if you close your eyes and think of the 90s in the East, it's going to be pretty obvious that you think of the Chicago Bulls, you think of Michael Jordan, you think of Scottie Pippen, you think of Phil Jackson, Horace Grant, Dennis Rodman, and all the players who came together to create one of the greatest runs in NBA history for a team. And even though the Bulls are the first team that comes to mind, and even though they're the team that certainly had the most conference finals appearances, even though they're certainly the team that had the most success, there's still a couple of other teams that had a great run during this decade and were really formidable. And, as much as they could during the Bulls' run, still had a great degree of success. And we're talking about the New York Knicks, we're talking about the Indiana Pacers, the Orlando Magic, and a couple of other teams that were able to break through for a couple of nice seasons here. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We are, of course, starting in 1990. And this is the third consecutive meeting between the Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons in the playoffs. And for the third time in as many seasons, the Pistons would send Michael Jordan packing. So Detroit is on top of the world. They're coming off of their 1989 title versus the Lakers. They finally got the monkey off of their backs, and they're looking to defend it versus a Bulls team that is growing increasingly antsy of reaching the finals. So Detroit wins in 5 games in 1988 in the second round versus the Bulls. They meet in the conference finals in 1989, but they win in 6 games that time. And then this 1990 edition of the rivalry goes 7 games. Now, stepping back to the regular season for some context, Chicago won 26 of their final 33 games to grab the 3 seed behind another fantastic Michael Jordan season. And this was also Scottie's breakout year. This is Scottie's 3rd season, and he was selected to his first All-Star game. And the Bulls are finally starting to show some noticeable features of their impending dynasty. The Pistons on the other side of the bracket had another elite season. They went for 59 wins and once again led the conference. The Pistons take the first 2 games in Detroit, most notably a big Game 1 win where Joe Dumars scores 18 third quarter points to take the series opener, and then he drops 31 in Game 2. Michael Jordan especially struggling in Game 2, shooting just 5 for 16 as the Pistons grab a 2-0 series lead. So Detroit appears poised to once again send the Bulls home packing, not intimidated at all by playing in Chicago where they went 2-1 during the regular season. Well, MJ responds with one of my favorite playoff games ever of his. He goes for 47 points, 10 rebounds, shoots 17 of 32 from the field to help Chicago cut the series deficit in half. On top of MJ's 47, Pippen threw in 29 points and 11 rebounds himself, and the star tandem also shot 22 for 26 from the free throw line. Isiah Thomas easily had his best scoring game of the series, going for 36 points himself. And then in Game 4, Jordan answered with another 40 bomb. He went for 42, as the rest of the Bulls also scored in double digits. The rest of the Bulls starters, that is, also scored in double digits. And just like that, after 4 games, the series was tied at 2 apiece, despite Dennis Rodman, Isiah Thomas, and Joe Dumars each scoring 20-plus points in that Game 4. So just like that, the young Bulls had a chance to put the defending champs on the ropes in Game 5. Well, for the Pistons, they got a spark from an unlikely source. Joe Dumars, once again with his scoring, leads the way with 20 points in the 97-83 Detroit win, but the team got a spark from Mark Aguirre. Aguirre came off the bench to spark a massive fourth quarter run, in which he opened with a 3-pointer and then an and one off a driving layup to open up a 12-point lead. Aguirre was a player who was an all-star himself and a 25-point-per-game player, not even just 2 seasons prior in Dallas. But he sacrificed his minutes and role to be part of a back-to-back champion in Detroit after he was traded. The Bulls somehow stave off elimination one more time in Game 6. MJ had a modest 29. Horace Grant went for 10 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 assists. Scottie had 19. But once again, this time for the Bulls, it was a role player who supplied the heat. This time, it was Craig Hodges giving that spark. Hodges was averaging just 3 points per game in Chicago's first 14 playoff games, but he scores 19 and makes all 4 of his threes as the Bulls blow out the Pistons to set up a Game 7. Well, for all the hopes and prayers of Chicago, for all the belief in miracles that the Pistons might be knocked off, Detroit proved to be too much as they drowned Chicago's hopes in cold water in Game 7. And this is one of the more infamous Game 7s in conference finals history. It was a convincing 93-74 win for the Pistons. Michael Jordan saying, "Naturally, I'm disappointed, but it was not meant to be." Detroit was simply a better basketball team on paper, and today they also proved that on the court. In this Game 7, Detroit was everything as advertised from the Bad Boys era. They were aggressive on the boards, smothering on defense. They denied the Bulls any sort of penetration. They thwarted their trapping defense, and of course, like the champs they were, remained confident and assured. Isiah Thomas said, "It was just another game in the playoffs for us." And Isiah had what Pistons coach Chuck Daly called, quote, his best game of the season, as Thomas went for 21 points and 11 assists as he constantly broke the Bulls' pressure to provide easy baskets for his teammates. So Jordan in this game actually played really well. He had 31 points, made 13 shots. It was his teammates who actually struggled this time. The Bulls scored a season-low 74 points, and they hit just 2 of 19 of their 3-point attempts, and they shot 31% overall from the field. Horace Grant, who cleaned the glass, had a team-high 14 rebounds, but he just went 3 of 17. And Scottie Pippen, of course, this is the infamous migraine game. He was struck by this piercing headache just before game time and only went 1 for 10 and scored 2 points. He says, "I was not able to give the effort I could, but I hope my teammates understand." He also said that he experienced double vision, saying, "I could see my teammates, but I couldn't tell how far they were from me. I just couldn't get that normal feeling." On top of that, John Paxson, who had a badly sprained ankle before the game, had to sit out and had his first non-start of the entire season, thus forcing Craig Hodges to start, and he went just 3 for 13. So ultimately, in this series, despite the poor Game 7, the Bulls simply couldn't get the job done on the road. Even though MJ was awesome at home, where he averaged 39 points per game on 52.5% field goal percentage, his production dropped significantly on the road, where his points per game dropped nearly 13 points down to 26.8, and his field goal percentage dropped 11 down to 41.5. For Conference Finals MVP, there's a strong case for Dumars, as he and Isiah Thomas were clearly the 2 best players for Detroit, or at least the 2 most important players. And I wouldn't fault you for picking Dumars, as he led the Pistons in scoring and did so efficiently. But to me, it was the steadying hand of Isiah Thomas that propelled Detroit. And after that rough Game 1 and Game 2 for him, where Joe Dumars admittedly did carry the Pistons, IT averaged 21, 6, and 9 with 2.6 steals over the final 5 games. 1991. And finally, revenge never tasted so sweet. Even though Detroit enters the 1991 season as betting favorites to win the title, it ended up being a season in which they were pretty clearly on the decline. They won just 50 games coming off of their second title. They beat the Blazers in 5 games in the 1990 finals, and Isiah Thomas only played in 49 games. Well, on the other side, the Bulls officially break out into juggernauts behind MJ, Pippen, and Grant as they achieve the perfect mix of youth and experience from all of their previous playoff runs, and they go for 61 wins. Well, in their 4th straight playoff meeting, you'd expect another classic series after these two teams have been playing each other for years. But it was pretty anticlimactic as the Bulls swept the Pistons, and this culminates in a 21-point win in Detroit to reach the finals for the first time. But what made this series especially memorable, and this game in specific, was the way in which the Pistons left the court. So during a stoppage, with about 7.9 seconds to play in the 4th quarter, multiple Detroit players, and most notably Isiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, and Mark Aguirre, lived up to their bad boy moniker by scurrying to the locker room without shaking hands with the victorious Bulls, whose bench they just walked past. So accounts slightly vary on the motivation behind this Pistons move in the final seconds of Game 4. In a 2013 appearance on NBA TV's Open Court, Isiah cited MJ as publicly disrespecting the Pistons during the series as the impetus. And it's true, Jordan called the Pistons undeserving champions and bad for basketball between games 3 and 4. In an interview for The Last Dance, Isiah pointed to the 1980s Celtics as skipping the handshake line when the Pistons finally conquered them by claiming that that was how the torch was typically passed. Now, there's still debate as to whether or not that was true, but in typical Bill Laimbeer fashion, Laimbeer maintains to this day that he doesn't regret the gesture, which was decided upon in the moment as the clock wound down. But Isiah, on the other hand, has said multiple times that given the years-long backlash, he would do things differently if he could go back. So for the series, Dumars struggled heavily, shooting just 35%. It was actually Vinnie Johnson who was the leading Piston. But of course, for the Bulls, MJ takes home his first Eastern Conference Finals MVP, averaging 35-7. Though Scottie does deserve some praise for arguably one of his best series, even avenging his migraine game from the year before by going for 22, 8, and 5, as well as 3 steals, while shooting nearly 56% for his true shooting percentage. Now, 1992, finally getting the proverbial monkey off their backs by winning the championship in 1991, the Bulls truly break out in 1992 by playing loose and submitting their greatest season to date as they blitz the league with a record of 67-15, mostly off the back of an offense whose offensive rating was over 7 points better than league average. Mike, of course, did his thing, went for 30 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists on the season, while they also got elite seasons from Pip and Horace. The team with the number 2 offense that year that was right behind Chicago, well, that was the Cavs, who tied their franchise best in wins with 57 behind the efforts of Brad Daugherty, Larry Nance, Mark Price, and others. And it was good enough to get the Cavs to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 1976. And I would even argue that this is the greatest non-LeBron Cavaliers team. Chicago, despite the dominant regular season, are coming off of an absolute dogfight versus the Knicks in round 2, a series that went 7 games. So coming off of this series versus New York, Cleveland definitely thought that they had a shot. In Game 1, the defending champs cruise, Michael with 33 points, Pippen with a masterful 29 points, 12 rebounds, and 9 assists, in what was described as a relatively relaxed atmosphere for Chicago. After a game that was never in doubt, it appeared that all systems were go for the Bulls. That is until a Game 2 that no one expected. The Cavaliers silenced the critics with a 26-point blowout at the old Chicago Stadium, the Cavs waxing the Bulls right out of the gate as they led by 26 points at halftime. The Bulls missed their first 13 shots of the game and never got closer than 19 and trailed by as many as 35. Despite great shooting games from Horace, BJ, and Stacey King, it was perhaps Scottie and Michael's worst playoff game as a duo, as they combined to shoot just 11 for 36 from the field, and MJ committed 6 of the team's 19 turnovers, while Cleveland was paced by Brad Daugherty, who finished with 28 and 9 on 11 of 20 shooting. In a roller coaster series where neither team could gain much traction, the Bulls land a punch right back in Game 3, rushing out of the gates with a 37-18 first quarter and never looked back en route to a 9-point win. 36-6-9 for MJ, 23-9-7 for Scotty, a double-double from Horace, a couple threes from Paxson, a nice game from Scott Williams off the bench. Great game for them overall. In Game 4, though, the Cavs bounced back and defend home court to even the series at 2 games apiece, but they didn't do it with their offense, which was their calling card. They did it with their defense by holding that explosive Chicago offense to just 85 points in a 14-point home win. MJ scores 35 but had to scrap for it on 33 shots, and the game actually belonged to Craig Elo, who, perhaps exacting a small degree of revenge for the game winner that MJ hit over him years prior, went for 21 points, and most notably made 4 of his 7 three-pointers. In Game 5, Chicago takes care of business in a 23-point win that sets up a pivotal Game 6 back at the Coliseum at Richfield and sets the stage for a hardwood classic. The Cavs once again do a fantastic job holding MJ in check for most of the game. Through 3 quarters, he shoots just 5 for 20 from the field and just 13 points as Cleveland doubled him and cut off his approaches to the basket. So it was Scotty and Horace who kept Chicago in the game and had it tied entering the 4th quarter. Well, you can't keep MJ down for too long as he steps up with 16 big 4th quarter points on 5 of 7 shooting. Mark Price nails a 3 to tie it at 93 with under a minute left before MJ answers with an and one to give Chicago the lead for good in the series. Larry Nance led Cleveland with 25 and 16, while Brad, playing through a sprained middle finger on his right hand, went for 18 and 13. Mark Price did struggle, 14 points on 14 shots, as he was playing with a sprained left ankle. Cavs coach Lenny Wilkins would applaud Brad and Mark for playing through injuries all playoffs. For the Bulls, this game was about their big 3. Horace went for 20 and 6, Pip went for 29, 12 and 5, while MJ of course finished with 29, 8 and 8 in that big 4th quarter. After the game, many Cavs fans, even Cavs players, were lamenting missed opportunities and wondering if they could have knocked off the Bulls if they were fully healthy. As for MVP, it's going to go to MJ again, 32, 6 and 6 on the series, and of course, once again, a strong second place mention for Scotty, who went for 20, 11 and 6 on the series himself. 1993. The Bulls are coming off of course, those back-to-back titles, and had a relatively quieter regular season in 1993 compared to the previous 2 years. And by relatively quieter for the 90s Bulls, that's still good for 57 wins. Chicago went back and forth with the Knicks and the Cavs all year for the 1 seed. The Bulls had the inside track for that 1 seed in the conference through February before the Knicks ended the season on a furious run, winning 28 of their final 34 games to steal the conference crown by finishing with 60 wins of their own, behind truly an all-time defense that finished with a relative defensive rating of minus 8.3, the best defense in Knicks history. The Bulls had the usual high-volume, high-scoring output from MJ and the contributions from Scotty and Horace, but the story of the 93 Bulls was the outbreak of a 25-year-old BJ Armstrong, who earned the starting job this year and saw him step in and average 12 points per game while shooting 45% from 3. The Knicks are, of course, led by Patrick Ewing, who averaged a sterling 24 and 12 with elite defense, but was also flanked by a breakout starter, that being a 27-year-old John Starks, to whom Pat Riley handed the starting keys for the final 43 games of the regular season, during which he averaged 19 points and 6 assists en route to an all-defense selection. Listen to our last episode on the 99 Knicks for a little bit more on John Starks' origin from Calvin. The two teams collide in the Eastern Conference Finals, and after 2 games in MSG, the Knicks put the greatest scare into the Bulls during their first three-peat, as the Knicks race out to a 2-0 series lead. Most notably, Game 1, where New York's stifling defense held MJ to just 10 for 27 shooting, including 3 for 13 in the second half, while Ewing and Starks combined for 50 points. MJ once again struggled in Game 2, shooting just 12 for 32 from the field, even drawing special scrutiny as New York newspapers published a story of MJ gambling in Atlantic City until 2:30 a.m. the day of Game 2. Just wild stuff. The Knicks dominated the glass once again and even got 21 points from Doc Rivers. That's right, the Doc Rivers. After the Game 2, the Knicks were 37-4 at MSG during the regular season and now riding a 27-game home win streak and had a stranglehold on the series, even frustrating Pippen to the point of being tossed in the fourth quarter for tossing a ball at an official. The Telegraph-Herald said, quote, "If the Knicks were a boxer, they'd be Tyson. The Bulls seeking their third straight title would be Ali, and right now, it's Tyson by a knockout." The champs responded with a team effort in Game 3. MJ's shooting struggles continued as he went just 3 for 18 from the field, but he was able to impact the game in other ways as he tossed in 11 assists, instead looking for other players. Pip carried the scoring load for the Bulls, going for 29 points on 10 of 12 shooting, while BJ and Paxson combined for 25 of their own, and the Bulls won by 20 points. Now John Starks' turn to be tossed in the fourth quarter. But the thing was, if the series was to go the Bulls' way, MJ had to step up. So, once again, cue one of his greatest games ever. In Game 4, Jordan explodes for 54 points to even the series as he shoots 18 for 30 from the field and 6 of 9 from 3. Phil Jackson calling his game outrageous. Despite a rough day for Scotty, who shot just 4 for 14, it was his three-point play, up 4 with a couple minutes left, that effectively sealed the game. So with momentum firmly back in Chicago's court, all the pressure was on New York heading into Game 5. Well, after that Game 5, so long home winning streak and so long home court, and consequently the Knicks' chance at dethroning the Bulls. Pippen scored 10 of his 28 in a 6-minute span in the third quarter, and then Jordan scored 17 of the final 24 Bulls points. But the biggest of all perhaps came from BJ Armstrong, whose three-pointer gave Chicago a 95-93 lead with 1:17 left on the clock. Charles Smith cut that lead to 1 with a free throw, and then Ewing blocked Stacey King on the other end to give the Knicks one more chance, down 1 point. Charles Smith had not 1, not 2, but 3 attempts at the basket to score, but failed. And it was the Knicks' first loss at MSG since January 28th, nearly 4 months earlier. Chicago would go on to close it out in 6 games, but to New York's credit, they did hang in tough as it was a 5-point game with 1 minute left before Pippen's three-pointer effectively iced the game, as well as the Knicks season. If there was ever a time during the Jordan run that co-MVPs could be argued, it was this one, as Jordan did have a few off-shooting games and Scotty was there every step of the way to support his teammate. Scotty finished the series with averages of 23, 7, and 4 on 51% shooting, while MJ went for 32, 6, and 7 while shooting just 40% from the field, though he did shoot 40% from 3 and 87% from the free throw line. For this series, I'll still give the slight edge to MJ for the 54-point game that effectively changed the tide of the series. In 1994, needless to say, MJ's absence, perhaps a topic for an episode another time, left a massive power vacuum in the East, one that the Knicks were all too eager to fill after they were sent home in 1993. They win 57 games and once again sported the best defense in the league, as they were the best rebounding team and turnover forcing team. Ironically enough, the Knicks still almost lost to Chicago in the second round without MJ, as Pippen, Armstrong, and Horace Grant helped pace the Bulls to 55 wins and took the Knicks to 7 games. But the Knicks do break through and they find themselves against this interesting, overachieving Pacers squad that was actually the 5 seed that year. They're led by Reggie Miller, as well as Rick Smits, Dale Davis, and Derek McKee. So yes, the Pacers were a relatively weaker conference finalist, and it definitely seemed that way through the first 2 games. The Knicks win the first two at home by an average of 11 points, and Ewing played perhaps two of his best playoff games ever, as he averaged 30 points and 12 rebounds with 2.5 steals and 4 blocks on 50% shooting in those two wins. So the question is, would the Knicks grab the series by the horns unlike last year? Well, it went just like it did last year, actually. Ewing followed his masterpieces in the first two games with perhaps his worst playoff game ever. 0 for 10 from the field, 1 point, 4 rebounds, as the Knicks lose 88-68, shooting just 34% as a team. Ewing played better in Game 4, but the Knicks lost that one as well, 83-77, thanks to 31 points from Reggie, who did most of his damage at the free throw line. Going back to New York, things somehow got worse. In a game that for Reggie Miller can be described as nothing short of a masterpiece, he rips the throat out of the Knicks and puts the Cinderella Pacers just one game away from the finals. Reggie goes for 39 points and 6 assists on 14 of 26 shooting, including 6 of 11 from 3. 25 of those 39 came in the fourth quarter when the Pacers outscored the Knicks 35-16 and turned a 12-point deficit into a 7-point victory. Ewing scored well. He had 29 points on 10 of 15 shooting, but the rest of the Knicks squad did not, as Oakley, Starks, and Derek Harper combined to shoot just 10 for 32. The Daily Courier led the game recap with the title, "New York Bricks. Knicks go cold, Miller goes nuts." The loss was all the more shocking because just as the year before with Chicago, the Knicks were an elite home team that had their streak snapped. They were 8-0 at MSG in the 1994 playoffs, and Indy had lost its previous 11 games in New York. And just like that, we head to Indy for Game 6. Reggie goes for 27, but he cools off significantly, shooting just 8 for 21 from the field, and that gives the Knicks an opening towards a 98-91 win. For the Knicks, this was definitely a case of redemption for a team that was mocked nationwide after their Game 5 collapse, as tabloids labeled the Knicks gaggers and chokers. Starks made special exception after getting torched in Game 5 by putting the pressure on Reggie offensively, going for 26 points on 8 of 11 shooting. Now, Game 7 was also one that did not disappoint. It was a game in which Patrick Ewing, perhaps one of his greatest games ever, refused to fold, refused to let foul trouble bother him in the biggest game of his career, and refused to give up even when the Knicks missed a big shot down 1 with 30 seconds left. So John Starks misses a shot that Ewing grabs off the rim for his 11th offensive rebound of the night, and dunked it back in to give the Knicks the lead for good in a 94-90 win. Ewing finished with 24 and 22, again 11 of those rebounds being offensive, as well as 7 assists and 5 blocks, all of this despite picking up his 5th foul with 5 minutes left in the game. The Knicks won despite shooting just 42%, and the reason was because they had 28 team offensive rebounds. Reggie Miller's 25 wasn't enough as the Knicks make their first finals in 21 years. The MVP here going to Patrick Ewing. Now, 1995. The Pacers come into this year thirsty to build off of their incredible success in 94 and to show that it wasn't a flash in the pan. They improved their regular season win total by 5 games and even exacted some revenge on New York along the way by beating them in 7 games in the second round. Coming from the other side of the bracket was an expansion team in just its 6th season of existence. That's the Orlando Magic, who had improved their win total every year since 1992, and exponentially so due to the drafting of one Shaquille O'Neal. At just age 22, he bullied his way to 29 points and 11 rebounds this season, and his 23-year-old sidekick Penny Hardaway went for 21 points and 7 assists as they cruised to the 1 seed. The Magic, by the way, most notably beat the Bulls with Michael Jordan in the second round. That series perhaps a topic for another time. Well, buckle up because we have yet another 7-game series behind a very dramatic first 5 games. In Game 1, the Pacers race out to a halftime lead behind 20 points from Reggie, but the second half, he cools off significantly, just going for 6. A big third quarter brought Orlando back into it, and Rick Smits got into foul trouble while the Stars did their thing for the Magic. 32 and 11 for Shaq, 20 points and 13 assists for Penny. And then Dennis Scott goes for 5 threes and 19 points. Game 2 gave us some real fireworks and a very high-scoring game that was atypical for the mid to late 90s. Orlando explodes for 34 first-quarter points and an 11-point advantage, just for Indiana to slowly chip at it over the course of the final 3 quarters, leaving a 116-114 lead for Orlando with 33 seconds left remaining after a Smits dunk before Nick Anderson makes the biggest shot of the game, a 3 with 13 seconds left to give the Magic a 2-possession lead and the win. Shaq got them there, 17 of his game-high 39 points coming in the fourth quarter, a true coming-out game for the young star. The series shifts to Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, where the Pacers eke out 2 games to stay alive in the series. And Game 3 is a 105-100 win behind big games from Derek McKee and Rick Smits. Game 4 gives us an absolutely thrilling finish. Shaq and Horace both foul out late in the game. That's right, this is Horace Grant, by the way, who was with the Bulls just a couple years prior. This is a massive pickup for the Magic. So he's changed sides. Indiana calls a timeout after they trade 3 straight 3-pointers with Orlando. So Brian Shaw hits a 3 for a 90-89 Magic lead. And then Reggie answers with a 3 of his own to make it 92-90 Pacers. And then Penny Hardaway answers back with one more 3 to make it 93-92 for the Magic. So there's 2 seconds left, and the final shot doesn't go to who you think it would go. You'd think it'd go to Reggie, right? Well, it's actually Rick Smits who drills a leaning 14-footer as the buzzer sounds. And just like that, we're squared at 2 in a game that is known as the Miracle at Market Square Arena.
With the strategy in place, Indiana played its final hand.
Derek looking, can't find an open man, flips it to the big fella, fake, shoots, and
Derek made the great pass directly into Rick. He shot fake, Tree took it, and he knocked in a jumper. And just one of those things that happen every once in a while, and it was a great ending.
Well, Game 5 was more of the hectic status quo. Game 5 was another Shaq masterpiece, 35 and 13 to pace the Magic, but it's his free throws that actually almost cost them the game, where he was 9 for 19 from the line. The Pacers cut a 14-point deficit to 3 before Mark Jackson's game-tying attempt bounces off the rim. So where the first 5 games of this series were all drama, the final 2 were kind of anticlimactic. Game 6 was a 27-point blowout by the Pacers, who took a 25-point lead at halftime and never looked back. Reggie gave them 36 points and 7 rebounds. Smits gave them 22 and 10. And funny enough, the Magic didn't even pitch that bad of a game offensively. It was just they got eaten alive by the Pacers, who could not miss, shooting 56% from the field. But as expected, Orlando held true home court back in Florida. After the Pacers appeared to find something in Game 6, they completely lost it in Game 7, as they lost 105-81. The game was within reach at halftime. It's a 7-point game, but a big third quarter for Orlando effectively sealed the game as Reggie shot just 5 for 13. Shaq overcame yet another nasty free throw performance, 3 for 11 from the line, by the way, by shooting 11 for 15 from the field and finishing with 25 and 11. MVP for the series definitely goes to Shaq, who goes for 27 and 10, shooting 66% from the field. Again, we'll ignore that free throw percentage, which, by the way, was below 50% for the series. And then an awesome second place mention to Penny Hardaway, who goes for 20 points, 3 rebounds, and 7 assists. Now, 1996, Chicago is back for their second dance. After that disappointing end to 1995, where even with MJ, they just weren't good enough. The roster wasn't good enough. In fact, the roster had been in the process of being overhauled since MJ retired the first time. Like I mentioned, they lost Horace Grant in free agency to Orlando before the 1995 season, and then they lost BJ Armstrong to the Raptors in the expansion draft before 96. The offseason that MJ retired, they signed Steve Kerr to supplement John Paxson, who would retire a year later. In February of 1994, they trade Stacey King to the Wolves for Luke Longley and a second rounder, and then later that year, they sign Ron Harper. So you can kind of start to see all the pieces of the second three-peat Bulls come together. All of this coalesces in the fall of 1995, where a month before the season starts, they trade Will Perdue to the Spurs for none other than Dennis Rodman to bolster an interior presence that was frankly Chicago's weakness. Now, we all know the story of the 96 Bulls, 72 wins, plus 13.4 net rating on the year, greatest regular season to date. And this is further emphasized by a dominant first 2 rounds where they sweep Miami and then beat the Knicks in 5 games. The Bulls run into the Magic. The Magic had themselves a nice year as well. They still have the nasty taste of a final sweep in their mouths and are looking to run it back as they go for 60 wins. And like Chicago, swept the first round and then beat their second round opponent, the Hawks, in 5 games in the second round. Well, if you were hoping for a close series, you're going to be pretty disappointed. It's a 4-game sweep for the Bulls against the Magic. And funny enough, this is a series where Penny and Shaq actually play extremely well. In Game 1 at the United Center, Penny goes for 38 points and Shaq has 27, 6, and 6. And despite those stat lines, when I say Chicago obliterated Orlando in Game 1, I mean it in every sense of the word. The Bulls win 121-83, which is a 38-point win. Penny and Shaq shot 28 for 42 from the field, but the rest of the team shot 7 for 31, while the rest of Orlando's starters, specifically outside of Penny and Shaq, were 0 for 11. For the Bulls, it was a team effort. Michael had 21, Scottie had 18, Rodman went for 13 points and 21 rebounds, near triple-double for Tony Kukoc, just a great game all around for the Bulls. In Game 2, we saw an entirely different Orlando team that, to their credit, bounced back after being embarrassed in Game 1. They had an 18-point lead off of a Shaq hook shot midway through the third quarter and got a massive 36-point, 16-rebound game from him overall. But somehow it wasn't enough, as Orlando scores just 35 second-half points and MJ scores 25 of his 35 in the second half. After that lead that Orlando amassed, that 18-point lead, they missed 11 of 12 shots and committed 5 turnovers as Chicago went on a 26-5 run. Now, Game 3 was the ultimate testament to just how stacked the Bulls were. Chicago wins 86-67, even though MJ shoots just 5 for 14 from the field. Scottie goes for 26 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists on 11 of 14 shooting. And despite having the league's best offense, the Bulls won this game with their defense, the Magic shooting 34%. Yet once again, after a nasty blowout, we get a spirited bounce-back game from the Magic, as they're down 3-0. They led by 9 at halftime in Game 4, but just like in Game 2, they let Chicago right back into it. Where MJ struggled in Game 3, Game 4 was all Mike. The rest of the Bulls shot just 20 for 47, as MJ shot 16 for 23, which was good for 45 points, and enough to overcome 28 points apiece from Penny and Shaq in a 106-101 win. So yeah, it's a weird sweep considering Shaq and Penny both, frankly, played awesome. Shaq went for 27 and 11 on the series on 64% shooting, while Penny averaged 25.5 points per game on nearly 50% shooting. It was the Magic supporting cast that was the issue. No other player averaged more than even 8 points per game for the Magic, and the Magic were also missing Horace Grant, which is a pretty notable absence from their key rotation. As for MVP, we got another great Scottie series, 19-7-7. We got an awesome Rodman series in his debut with the Bulls, 12 points and 16 rebounds, with nearly half of his boards being offensive. But Jordan takes the cake. 29.5 points, 5.5 rebounds on 52% shooting. Now, the 97 Bulls pick up right from where they left off the year before and even threaten their 1996 win total before finishing with 69 wins. And they run into another expansion team from Florida, this time the Miami Heat, albeit the Heat are in the midst of a franchise best season. They go for 61 wins and shattered their previous best of 42 wins from the year prior and from 1994. But the thing is, Miami is pretty green. They had never won a playoff series to this point, as their first 3 playoff appearances were all first-round losses, where Chicago breezed through their side of the bracket, going 7-1 versus the Bullets and the Hawks. The upstart Heat went the distance in both of their series as they beat the Magic 3-2 in the first round and the Knicks in 7 games in the second. Miami's story is that they had the best defense. They're anchored by 26-year-old Alonzo Mourning in his second year as a Heat, as well as PJ Brown, who is second-team all-defense, and wing stopper Keith Askins out of Alabama. Mourning received All-NBA consideration as well, but it was his teammate Tim Hardaway who was voted first-team All-NBA in his first full season in Miami. So again, 1997 is Tim's first full year as a Heat, because he was traded from Golden State halfway through the 96 season. Hardaway averages 20 points and 9 assists and nearly 2 steals per game, and that was made even more incredible as many saw Hardaway not even a year prior as completely washed up. He was age 30 in 1997 and was less than 2 full years removed from missing the entirety of the 94 season after a knee injury derailed one of the more promising starts to a career that we've seen as he was taking Golden State by storm. Well, the Miami feel-good story sadly ends in the Eastern Conference Finals versus the Bulls dynasty, and this was an ugly series, a defensive slog as 2 top 4 defenses collided. Though this was a short 5-game series in which the Heat were quite frankly overmatched, credit where it's due to their league best defense that held the Bulls' number 1 offense to nearly 16 points per game less than they scored in the regular season. Game 1 goes to Chicago, 84-77, as Miami shoots just 50% from the free throw line, which effectively sealed their fate. Chicago actually only shot 36% from the field, but they got 20 offensive rebounds. Now, these offensive boards are going to be the key, as both teams actually shot pretty equally throughout the series. But the difference was Chicago obliterated Miami on the offensive glass. On the series, they out-rebounded them on the offensive boards 86-53, which is basically good for 33 extra chances to score. Game 2 is somehow uglier. 75-68 Chicago. Yeah, that's right, 75-68. Steve Kerr's reaction was yuck. Literally says yuck. The fans really ought to get their money back. I feel sorry for them. Miami shoots 34% from the field and had 29 points at halftime. And it wasn't even a great Jordan game. He was just 4 for 15 from the field, while Scottie had 23 points on 9 of 21. And it gets worse in Game 3. Chicago shoots 36% in the first quarter, while Miami goes for 26%. Despite the slow start as a team, Scottie and MJ combined for 8 for 13 in that first quarter in Game 3, and it's all Bulls from there. It's a 13-point game at halftime, 23 points after 3 quarters, and it culminates in a 24-point Bulls win that all but sealed the series. MJ went for 34 and 8 on 14 of 25 shooting, while Scottie went for 21 on 8 of 16, both rare 50% shooting games for this series. And so far, through 3 games, only one Heat player has scored 15 points in a game this series, and that was Alonzo, who went for 21 back in Game 1. Now, maintaining some integrity, the Heat do dodge a sweep in Game 4, and all it took was arguably Michael's worst playoff game ever. At least through 3 quarters. MJ was 0 for 11 by halftime, while the Bulls fall behind by 16 points behind an awesome Tim Hardaway half. But the problem is Miami all but gives it back in the third quarter, and it's not off the back of MJ. The Bulls cut that 16-point deficit to 4 despite Jordan shooting 2 for 11 in the third. That's right, if you're keeping track, MJ is 2 for 22 through 3 quarters. Well, Miami turns the ball over 8 times, and Chicago gets 8 offensive rebounds in the third quarter alone. So the Bulls rally, and then in the fourth quarter, MJ rallies himself after that bad shooting start to shoot 7 for 13 and goes for 20 points in the fourth quarter, but it's not enough. Miami shoots pretty cleanly the rest of the way, and a team effort brings home the 87-80 win. Well, the comeback effort ends there as the Bulls close it out with a 100-87 Game 5 win. This is a weird series because if there was ever a year in which MJ was meh and you could maybe look elsewhere, it's probably this series. He averaged 30 points and 8 rebounds, but did so on just 39% shooting. But the problem is no one else stood out. Scottie went for 17 points, but he didn't really shoot that much better from the field, just 42%. You could maybe argue Rodman because it was his offensive rebounding that tipped the scales drastically in Chicago's favor. But if you look at the on-off data, it indicates that Jordan still had the greatest impact for the Bulls and was still the most important. So we'll give it here. 1998. Chicago, as we know from The Last Dance, is able to scratch together one last run in a more depleted Eastern Conference. The only other true contender are the Pacers, who are still hanging around. They submit a nice 58-win campaign behind a top 5 offense and defense, despite their core of guys starting to age a little bit. They got great seasons from Reggie, Smits, and Mark Jackson, even with all of them being 31 or older. They even got a hyper-efficient, low-volume scoring season from a 34-year-old Chris Mullin, who they traded for in August of 1997 for Eric Dampier and Dwayne Farrell. These two, again, were clearly the best teams in the East, and it shows as Indy pushes this Bulls run to the limits. Game 1 was all defense, especially smothering on part of Chicago as they forced Indiana into 26 turnovers, making them look like pretenders. Scottie took on the onus of guarding Mark Jackson by putting big pressure on the ball with his size. The team didn't shoot well. Pip was just 1 for 9, Kukoc was 2 for 11, even MJ started 1 for 9 before he turned it around and scored 25 of his 31 in the second half. In Game 2, Indiana plays a great first half. They led by 7 and shot 51%, but then were promptly handled in the third quarter, which is a signature of the Bulls during this era, sort of like the Warriors of the 2010s. MJ's 41 points were overwhelming, while Scottie filled the box score with 21, 6, 5, 5, and 3. Chris Mullin and Rick Smits were awesome for Indiana, as was Antonio Davis off the bench, but Reggie struggled. Game 3, though, is where Reggie Miller strikes back and shows why he's one of the best clutch players in the game at this point. He scores 13 of his 28 in the fourth quarter and made 3 threes, including 2 big free throws on a bum ankle as Indiana fended off Chicago 107-105. Reggie hobbled around on one good leg, yet still had enough to make the big plays. MJ scored an inefficient 30 points on 9 of 22 shooting. So, interestingly enough, Jordan goes to the line with 12 seconds left in a 3-point game, down 3, but goes just 1 for 2 from the line, missing a chance to make it a 1-point game. And this is big because those aforementioned Reggie free throws consequently gave the Pacers a 4-point lead, and then a harmless pip and dunk with 2 seconds left ended the game. Now, Game 4 is wild. It's an all-timer. It's a game that left Phil Jackson saying an unbelievable finish, and Jordan saying that it was hard to describe. So let me walk you through it. We're going to go to the final minute. There's 52 seconds left. The Bulls have the ball and a 92-91 lead, and Market Square Arena is roaring. MJ's toying with Derek McKee near the top of the key, and in one motion, MJ picks up his dribble and shoots a 19-footer so quickly that McKee has no chance to defend it. 94-91 Bulls. Now 33 seconds left. Travis Best does what he has been doing for 2 games now, driving to the hole and making the Bulls miss. So Travis Best's layup cuts the Bulls' lead to 94-93. Now 22 seconds left. Dennis Rodman tries to pick McKee into Ohio. Well, problem is Phil Jackson doesn't see it that way, calling it an awful call, but the officials call an offensive foul on Rodman. Very, very costly for the Bulls. Timeout Pacers. So the Pacers have the ball, they work the clock down to 7 seconds, and they take their best shot, this one from McKee, but MJ is there to block it out of bounds. Things are looking pretty good, but 5 seconds left. A scuffle begins when Ron Harper knocks Reggie McKee's inbounds pass loose from Reggie Miller. Pippen gets the ball, he's fouled, and in the ensuing mayhem, a tumbling Harper pulls Reggie Miller into the Bulls bench. Now, of course, Reggie does not appreciate this, judging by the left that he throws at Harper, and after order is finally restored, and no additional fouls are called, Pippen goes to the line and misses both free throws. Reggie Miller said after the game, "Pressure can get to anybody." At that point in time, it got a hold of Scottie. No love lost between the Pacers and the Bulls. 3 seconds left. Pippen's second miss bangs off the rim and off the hands of Jordan and McKee. What originally is called a jump ball is changed to a Pacers ball, and during the timeout, Indiana draws up a play for Reggie. On it, Ron Harper is picked off of Reggie and Jordan switches. Reggie pushes Jordan away, and Reggie runs to the right side, takes McKee's inbounds pass, and gets off a three-pointer over a lunging Jordan. Pacers 96, Bulls 94. Now, about a second left, timeout Bulls. As Larry Bird knows, who is the coach of the Pacers, there's still time on the clock. And is there enough time for the Bulls and for Jordan to get something off? Well, MJ gets free and takes Tony Kukoc's inbounds pass. McKee swipes at the ball, which is enough to force Jordan into a double pump, and the shot goes longer than Jordan wants, bouncing off the backboard and away into a 2-2 series. Absolutely wild game. Now, home court holds true once again in Game 5 as Chicago blows out Indiana 106-87. But once again, home court holds true again in Game 6, and against all odds, the Pacers force a 7th game against the Chicago Bulls. This one, like the other 2 games in Indiana, went down to the final moments. MJ's in control of the ball with Chicago down 2. He's guarded by Derek McKee. He makes a move to his right, but stumbles. Phil Jackson is looking for a foul as the ball pops loose. McKee grabs it, he's fouled, makes the first free throw, and then purposely misses the second so the clock expires. After the game, the Bulls would not leave the officials alone as Phil ripped the referees mercilessly. MJ, of course, also claimed it to be an obvious foul, even saying that, of course he didn't trip. I'm not that clumsy. Well, go back and watch it. Foul or not, you can argue whatever you want. MJ did have other opportunities in the game. He missed 2 shots in the final minute that would have either tied or given them the lead. And Travis Best's 13-footer with 33 seconds left essentially gave the Pacers the game. Game 7, thankfully, did not disappoint either. The Bulls dynasty survives for at least one more series. A tight back-and-forth game helped to culminate 2 weeks of struggle and drama. The Bulls admittedly came out a little tense and nervous in Game 7, a situation that they weren't familiar with during this era. The Pacers take a 20-7 lead in the first quarter before the Bulls could pose themselves and pull off a big run of their own. It came down to the final 5 minutes once again. Chicago outscored Indiana 9-4 the rest of the way, starting with a jumper from Scottie after he grabbed one of Chicago's 22 offensive rebounds. MJ drew a double team that a possession later and then fed Luke Longley for a corner jumper while the Pacers committed 3 more turnovers and missed a shot. Antonio Davis was able to cut it to 85-83 with 2 minutes left, but Pippen answered immediately with a running hook that essentially iced the game. In this game, funny enough, the Pacers actually shot way better than the Bulls, 48% to the Bulls' 38%. And the Bulls even shot a horrendous 24-41 from the free throw line. But as has been the theme from 1996 to 1998, extra opportunities from relentless rebounding granted them enough points. 22 offensive boards for the Bulls in this game to Indiana's 4. MJ shot just 9 for 25 for his 28 points, but he did have 9 boards and 8 assists, while Scottie overcame a poor shooting game as well with those timely plays, including 12 boards, 6 of those being offensive. It was Tony Kukoc who had a miraculous game, going for 21 points on 7 of 11 shooting, including 3 threes, while Steve Kerr also had 3 3-pointers himself. On the series, Kukoc was awesome, 15 points per game on 51% shooting. Pippen didn't shoot the ball very well, just 39%, but he did fill the box score as he did, 17, 8, and 5. But MJ takes it home once again, 32 points, 6 rebounds, and 47% shooting. Now, finally, in 1999, I won't go too deep into this one. I would actually recommend going back and listening to our previous episode on the 1999 NBA lockout and the 1999 Knicks for a deep dive on this series. But it's 2 familiar faces. It's the Knicks and the Pacers once again. It's a series highlighted by a pretty drastic injury that really altered the course of the rest of the season. In Game 2, Patrick Ewing, who admittedly at this point is declining in skills, he's aging at this point, but he goes down with an Achilles injury in Game 2. While the new look Knicks, who are led not any longer by John Starks or Charles Oakley, they have guys like Latrell Sprewell, Allen Houston, Larry Johnson. This team actually upsets the Pacers, and of course, as we know with the 99 Knicks, they're a team that is the 8 seed who makes the finals in this really weird lockout shortened 1999 season. Again, I recommend going back and listening to that episode for a deep dive into what happened. And of course, the hallmark moment from that 1999 Eastern Conference Finals is Larry Johnson's 4-point play in Game 3 that effectively saves the series for the Knicks, as they were on the brink of really kind of losing control of that series. And it all culminates in this awesome Game 6 from Allen Houston, who goes for 30-plus points and really buoys them. And if this game is made, or this series is made all the more sweet because the Knicks hate the Pacers. They've been playing each other for several years at this point. And most of that ire, that wrath, honestly, is directed more so at Reggie Miller, who is notorious for having killed the Knicks over the years in multiple playoff series. If you go back and look at a lot of those Knicks and Pacers series, it's Reggie Miller that people have that disdain for. He had the heat check in front of Spike Lee in the 1994 playoffs. He had the iconic 8 points in 9 seconds against the Knicks in the 1995 postseason. And then for good measure, Reggie Miller's game-tying three-pointer that he made in the 1998 second-round series more or less swung that outcome as well. So this series was all the more sweet for Knicks fans as they're able to pull that off. So again, won't go into too much detail. I recommend going back and listening to that episode. And as for Conference Finals MVP in 1999, cases can be made for Allen Houston. He averaged 19 points per game and had that massive closeout game in New York. Latrell Sprewell averaged 18 points per game, but he was pretty inefficient. Larry Johnson, of course, had that iconic 4-point play in Game 3 and averaged 16.5 points per game and was 54% shooting. But I ended up settling with Marcus Camby. Marcus Camby had an awesome game, 14 points and 12 rebounds, and stepped in for the injured Patrick Ewing, despite being undersized against a pretty big Pacers team, most notably Rick Smits, who was a really good player. Held his own against him. Marcus Camby was really young at this point. He wasn't quite the defensive player of the year guy that we'd see him be with Denver in about 7 to 8 years down the line. Just an awesome series from Marcus Camby. So I'm going to go out on a limb and actually give 1999 Conference Finals MVP to Marcus Camby. Now, to wrap up this episode, I will summarize, how all the teams did, and of course, go back over some of our winners. So Chicago leads the way, of course, with 7 conference finals appearances. They go 6-1 in their 7 Eastern Conference Finals. The team with the second most appearances is actually the Indiana Pacers. They appear 4 times in 5 years, but they lose all 4 of them. The Pacers lose in 1994, 1995, 1998, and 1999. Sorry, that's 4 in 6 years. A pretty brutal stretch, but don't worry, Pacers fans. In our next episode for the East in the 2000s, the Pacers are going to break through. Literally the next season, after this heartbreaking loss versus the Knicks, they break through in 2000. But the Pacers make it 4 times, and they lose all 4. Next up is the Knicks, who went 2-1. Orlando made 2 conference finals. They went 1-1. And then 3 teams made 1 conference finals apiece, that being the Heat, the Pistons, and the Cavs, who all went 0-1. Sorry, typo on that one. The Heat and the Cavs went 0-1. The Pistons did make 2. They went 1-1. They won in 1990 and then lost in 1991. Well, this is a fun episode. Again, I know there's a lot of Bulls, there's a lot of Michael Jordan, a lot of Scottie Pippen. MJ, of course, takes home 6 conference finals MVPs. Really, if you wanted to argue about that 1993 series when he really struggled outside of that 54-point game, that's probably where it was the tightest. But even then, felt like his impact was the most important thing for those Bulls teams. But I really wanted to highlight how awesome not only MJ was, but how awesome Scottie was, especially in that first three-peat run. All 3 of those conference finals he was awesome in. Then you had Shaq, who had the awesome 1995 series. Ewing was awesome in 1994 with his MVP award. Isiah Thomas in 1990. And then, of course, Marcus Camby in 1999, even if you wanted to make a case for another couple of Knicks. Well, thanks for hopping into this episode. We appreciate it. Would love to hear what you think. If you disagree with me, if you agree with me, would love to hear what you think about these picks. And in the next episode, we're going to go ahead and stay in the 1990s, but step back and look at the Western Conference, where there's a lot more parity compared to the East. Again, this is a lot of Bulls, even though there were a couple of other really good teams. In the West in the 1990s, you have like 6 or 7 teams that year in and year out have legitimate cases to make the finals, like the Suns, the Spurs, the Rockets, the Lakers, the Jazz, the Sonics, the Blazers. Really, like half the conference was really, really good at some point during this decade. So really excited to dive into the West in the 1990s before we step ahead to the 2000s. So be sure to give us a like, give us a rating, subscribe to us. I'm going to get some stuff on YouTube. Calvin and I are going to pump out some other full-length episodes because, of course, as usual, he and I are doing these episodes together. And we're going to try and have some guests on as well. So going to be a big year for us. We're very excited to do that. And until next time, this is Josh with Once Upon a Dribble signing out.